Let's start with Rick Scott, because this is now there were 4 senators, as far as I know. Maybe you guys can maybe correct me if there were more. But there were 4 senators, as far as I can tell, who came out and gave the line. Do we have that Lindsey Graham thing too? Where Lindsey Graham talks about the nurse? We should pull that for later. Lindsey Graham came out and said something to the effect of, like, you don't want this unemployment insurance. You don't want a nurse to get $24 an hour as part of unemployment insurance because, and David Dane will explain, unemployment insurance covers anywhere from like 65 to 90%, depending on how much you made, will cover you that while you're unemployed. And in the stimulus bill, people will get an extra $600 a month. So theoretically, the idea is to bring people up to 100% of what they were making or close to it. In some instances, particularly if for very low wage workers, it's conceivable that for a month, you could make 110% of what you normally made. That $600 may be big enough that it actually pushes you over what you would make on a normal month. So Lindsey Graham was out there complaining that nurses might be offered on unemployment $24 an hour, and then they may decide not to go back to work because of that $24 an hour. Now, it's an absurd notion, and Dayan takes it on, clearly, we're headed into, at the very least, a severe recession, but probably a depression. And the idea that someone would walk away from their job, any job, because they're going to make an extra $50, $100 in the next month versus the next month is absurd. The idea that you can walk away from your job and be eligible for unemployment is also absurd. You need to be fired. Your boss verifies it. And then it's also sort of offensive to assume, like, oh, well, yeah, nurses, they're just in it for the cash. Like, of all the people, like, you know what? I think if that was the case, they probably would be walking off the job right now. But putting that aside, I think there was something going on with South Carolina, but we'll talk about that with David Dayan. But here is Rick Scott. He is one of those senators who was threatening to hold up the stimulus bill on the idea that some low-wage workers could actually make 110% of what they would have made had they not been fired. And that would somehow keep people from wanting to work. And it's just an absurd argument. But Rick Scott is also one of the worst people to make it. And here is a reporter asking a fairly obvious question. Rick Scott is the richest person, I think, in the Senate.
I apologize. I don't know how to ask this without sounding like I'm being a smartass, and I'm not. But do you understand how bad the optics are to have probably the wealthiest person in the Senate potentially holding up this bill over a couple of $100 for some of the poorest people in this country?
Well, you're not talking to me, but I'll weigh in.
Here's what I care about. I want to make sure that our small businesses, all of our businesses, including our hospitals, our nursing homes, everybody can make sure people want to come to work. And I also want to make sure, which I in the bill that does it, you have an unemployment system in the states that work, and we need to continue to work that, and we have a supplement to it.
Would you just contemplate what he's revealing here? He's saying if we pay, if unemployment inadvertently or on purpose, this stimulus bill gives people who have been fired. This is how unemployment works. You get fired or laid off. You can't quit and collect unemployment. Now, maybe these guys don't know that, or maybe they're just lying. But even putting that aside, let's talk about just the broader idea that if you were for a month to give someone 100% of what they would earn, that they wouldn't want to work because they're making as much unemployed as they would when they're working. I don't think he understands what the word want means. I think what he means to say is that if you were to give people 100% of what they could make at work, then there would be no leverage over them. Then we wouldn't have the ability to say to them, you better show up at work or you don't eat. You better show up at work or you don't get health care. You better show up at work or you won't be able to buy toilet paper on the black market or wherever you're buying it. That's what he's saying. If you want to work, you work. What he's saying is that we don't have the leverage to force people to blackmail their ability to survive if unemployment is too generous. Now, like I say, that is completely not how unemployment insurance works. You need to be fired or laid off to collect unemployment insurance. But just the mentality there. That dude doesn't need any money. Rick Scott is incredibly wealthy. He made millions of dollars working as the CEO of a company that was fined the largest amount in history for Medicaid fraud. So he's extremely, extremely wealthy, but yet he shows up at work. So in other words, what he's saying is that, like, with folks like that who make that little amount of money, you need to threaten their ability to survive to get them to work. And if you lose the ability to threaten them with that, then the system breaks down. It's a perfect illustration of the dynamic that is existing for a significant number of people in this country. I don't know, half, quarter, that people like him who represent, the top, I don't know, 1%, maybe actually probably less, top 0.5%, the way that they perceive these people. We must continue to leverage their ability to survive to allow them to, to get them back to work.